a historic conflict, the deep roots of a centuries-old tension. The Israeli-Iranian conflict is one of the most complex and dangerous in the world. It is a deep confrontation, rooted in history, ideology, and geopolitics. This conflict pits two regional powers against each other, each with its own ambitions and fears. Before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the Shah's Iran was an important ally of Israel in the Middle East. The two countries shared common interests, including the fight against Nasser's pan-Arabism and the Soviet threat. However, this alliance of convenience did not erase the profound differences between the two countries. The Palestinian question became a rallying point for anti-Zionist and anti-Western movements. The 1979 revolution, the rise of political Islam, and the final break. This pivotal moment in history reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 marked a major turning point in the Israeli-Iranian conflict. The overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of an Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini changed the dynamics of the region. The coming to power of Ayatollah Khomeini, a radically anti-Zionist Shiite cleric, sounded the death knell for the alliance between the two countries. His vehement opposition to Israel was a cornerstone of his foreign policy. The new Iranian regime severed diplomatic relations with Israel and began actively supporting Palestinian and Lebanese armed groups hostile to the Jewish state. This support included not just rhetoric, but tangible aid. Iran thus became the sponsor of the resistance front against Israel, providing it with financial, military, and logistical support. This backing significantly bolstered the capabilities of these groups. This strategy led to a growing rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the two regional powers vying for leadership of the Muslim world. Their competition further complicated the already volatile situation in the Middle East. By supporting Palestinian armed groups, Iran contributed to the radicalization of the conflict and the failure of peace negotiations. This involvement deepened the divisions and made the prospect of peace even more elusive. Support for armed groups, Hezbollah and Hamas, instruments of the struggle against Israel. Iran's support for anti-Israeli armed groups is one of the main points of friction with Israel and the international community. Hezbollah, created in 1982 following the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, has become a major political and military player in Lebanon. Hamas, meanwhile, has controlled the Gaza Strip since 2007. Israel considers Iranian support for these groups to be an existential threat and has carried out numerous airstrikes against Hezbollah and Hamas targets. These strikes have often led to escalations of violence and civilian casualties. The nuclear threat, a specter, looming over Israeli-Iranian relations. The Iranian nuclear program is another major source of tension between Iran and Israel. Israel believes that Iran is seeking to acquire nuclear weapons and has repeatedly threatened to carry out preemptive strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. An international agreement on the Iranian nuclear program was concluded in 2015 between Iran and the major powers. However, US President Donald Trump decided to unilaterally withdraw the United States from the agreement in 2018 and reinstated US sanctions against Iran. This decision rekindled tensions between Iran and the United States. October 2024, a month of escalation and violence in the Middle East. The month of October 2024 was marked by an escalation of violence between Israel and Iran. Several serious incidents have taken place, raising fears of a new war in the Middle East. The first major incident was the targeted assassination of a senior official in the Iranian ballistic missile program. The operation, attributed to the Israeli Mossad, took place on Iranian soil and angered Tehran. A few days later, rockets were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel, injuring several civilians. Israel immediately accused Hezbollah of being responsible for the attack. The IDF, the Israeli army, retaliated by bombing Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. Missile strikes and targeted assassinations. A vicious cycle of reprisals? Israel has conducted intensive airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria, targeting weapons depots and military infrastructure. Iran responded forcefully by launching ballistic missiles at Israeli military bases in the Golan Heights. These missile launches set off air raid sirens across northern Israel and sent millions of residents to bomb shelters. The escalation of violence has also taken a worrying turn with targeted assassinations of high-ranking political and military figures. An Iranian general was killed in a car bomb attack in Damascus. The international community, faced with escalation, calls for calm and cautious condemnations. The escalation of violence between Israel and Iran has raised serious concern within the international community. The United Nations, the European Union, and many countries have called on both sides for restraint and an immediate ceasefire. The UN Security Council has met urgently on several occasions to discuss the situation in the Middle East. However, divisions among the permanent members of the Council have prevented the adoption of a common resolution condemning the violence and calling for de-escalation. Many countries, including France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and China, have also expressed their concern over the escalation of violence. The United States and the G7's unwavering support for Israel, but persistent concerns. The international community watches closely as tensions rise in the Middle East. The United States, steadfast allies of Israel, have given their full support to the Jewish state in the face of what they have called Iranian aggression. This support includes not only diplomatic backing, but also substantial military aid. The US President reaffirmed the United States' unwavering commitment to Israel's security and warned Iran that any attack on its ally would be met with a swift and decisive response. This strong stance aims to deter any potential threats from Iran. The United States has also strengthened its military presence in the region by deploying an aircraft carrier and B-52 bombers to the Persian Gulf. These actions are intended to showcase the US's readiness to defend its interests and allies. The G7 also strongly condemned Iran's provocative actions and expressed its full solidarity with Israel. The leaders emphasized the importance of maintaining stability in the region. Despite their unwavering support for Israel, the United States and its European allies have expressed concern about the risk of a wider conflagration in the Middle East. They are wary of the potential for escalating conflicts that could draw in multiple nations and lead to a broader regional war. Geopolitics of the conflict, regional rivalries, and strategic stakes in the Middle East. The Israeli-Iranian conflict cannot be understood without taking into account the complex geopolitical context of the Middle East. Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia have been engaged in a regional power struggle for decades. The two countries support opposing sides in conflicts in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon. Israel is wary of Iran's growing influence in the region and its support for armed groups hostile to the Jewish state. Israel considers Iran an existential threat and does not rule out the use of force to prevent Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The shadow of war, an open conflict with incalculable consequences. The escalation of violence between Israel and Iran raises serious concerns about the risk of an open war in the Middle East. Such a conflict would have disastrous consequences for the region and for the entire world. On the human level, a war between Israel and Iran would result in an appalling number of civilian casualties. Both countries possess significant military arsenals, including ballistic missiles capable of striking targets hundreds of kilometers away. Economically, a war in the Middle East would have a devastating impact on the global economy. Conflict would severely disrupt global energy supplies and cause oil prices to skyrocket. Future prospects, diplomacy or conflict, uncertainty hangs over the Middle East, casting a long shadow over the region's future. Faced with the escalation of violence between Israel and Iran, tensions are at an all-time high. The international community is faced with a major dilemma: how to address this escalating crisis. The pressing question remains: how to defuse tensions and avoid another devastating war in the Middle East. Direct or indirect negotiations between Israel and Iran, though fraught with challenges, under the aegis of the United Nations or other international powers, offer a glimmer of hope. These negotiations could make it possible to find a peaceful solution to the conflict if all parties are willing. However, the obstacles to resuming dialogue are numerous and complex. Mistrust runs deep between the two countries, fueled by years of conflict and animosity. Positions seem irreconcilable on key issues such as the Iranian nuclear program and support for armed groups, which further complicates the situation. The international community must redouble its efforts, working tirelessly to bridge these divides. To prevent another war in the Middle East, a concerted and sustained effort is essential.